Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader Reading Books for You. Today, I will be reading Chapter 12 from The Moon and the Magic Box by Michael Ross, illustrated by Magdalena Adic. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 12. The Chase Begins. The gang in the cave awoke fairly early in the morning. They threw down some breakfast and planned the day ahead. They discussed how they were to organize everything to make sure Pengy and his box were to rendezvous in Bramblewood at 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. In the meantime, Pengy had received a message from his workers on the moon that the Dammers had reinforced their numbers and were desperate to get those star map coordinates. So, Pengy had warned the others to be particularly careful and to be on the lookout for severe drops in temperature as the first indication that the Dammers were around. Since it was summer, none of the gang had any winter clothes, so Bragger had persuaded his uncle to take them to a seaside resort called Boscastle. There they would find a comprehensive, well-stocked outdoor store to kit up with thermals, woolly hats, gloves, and so on to starve off the freezing cold if the Dammers discovered their whereabouts. Problem was, Bragger's uncle, Mad Jack, had an old rusty red London open-topped bus that billowed out lots of gray smoke. But it didn't matter. It was probably a good disguise, and certainly better than a group of teenagers riding BMXs. Pengy warned them, though, to keep downstairs and not venture to the upper deck, where they could be recognized. They set off towards Boscastle. They were almost there when who were flying way above the clouds in the opposite direction towards Appletree Farm but the dreaded Dammers. The gang almost got away with not being spotted, if not for one of the Dammers, who thought it would sink below the cloud and have a quick scout around. He noticed the noisy, smelling old red bus, and would have continued back to the rest of the Dammers when something caught his eye. On the upper deck was Jello. He had sneaked up there with a few packets of crisps tucked away under his shirt to scoff the crisps in peace. The Dammer went down a little and investigated the human a little more and felt it recognized him from images that were telepathically passed around when they had their last meeting above the clouds a few days ago. So it turned tail and sped back to catch up with the other Dammers to tell them. By now, the bus had arrived at the outdoor pursuit store, and everyone was inside grabbing hats, gloves, warm coats, and so on as quickly as they could. They all paid their dues. Then it was back on the bus, and quickly it made its way back to the cave. They were halfway back when now the Dammers had been caught up by their scout, who had related its thoughts that those they were seeking were traveling in the opposite direction in a red bus. They turned around and retracted their steps. Little did the Dammers know that the bus was now going back the opposite way. It was another Dammer scout who kept bobbing below the clouds on the lookout when he saw the red bus, but now going in the opposite direction. So he caught up with the others and passed on what he had seen. At first, the others didn't believe him. What were these humans doing? First, they go one way, then go the other? Maybe they were onto them, and they were using some form of human tactics to confuse them. Well, it was working. Unfortunately, it now made them more determined to find them. Meanwhile, Cringeworthy, Dumb, Darling, Blackmood, and Reggie, the telecommunications expert, were racing in an SUV to find Troy's iPhone, and they thought, Troy and the rest of the teenagers. A second SUV with 2 MPs was following to put the captives in. Reggie was trying to read the laptop and shouting out which direction to go. He was feeling very nauseous, and a number of times felt he might be sick. It wasn't helping that the SUV was being driven by someone that thought he was a Formula One driver, screeching around corners, braking sharply, and then slamming his foot down on the accelerator. Everyone on the SUV was holding on for dear life. Finally, they slowed down and were going through the gates of a sewage treatment plant. "Aha!" said Cringeworthy. "Very clever. Who would think that they would hide in a place like this?" Reggie, who was looking like he might barf at any second, wearily said, "The indications are that the iPhone is through that gray door over there, the one with the 'Do Not Enter' sign on it. It also had one of those yellow stickers on the door warning that hazardous substances were inside." "Oh, so very clever," remarked Cringeworthy. "Who would think of looking for teenagers in a hazardous substances room? Good job. I'm cleverer than they are. Don't you think, Darling?" Darling came back with, "Yes, sir, absolutely right. But don't you think the smell is rather disgusting? And we haven't got out of the SUV yet." The SUV stopped and they all stepped out. The smell of human waste was particularly strong and made all them retch at first until they put a handkerchief or rag over their noses. For poor Reggie, the smell was the last straw. He was sick. It splattered everywhere. Darling and Dumb were amused by this, looked at each other, and Darling whispered, "Pavement pizzas." Cringeworthy hissed at Darling and Dumb, "Right, you two, behind me. We're taking advantage of the element of surprise. After 3, we will rush in there," pointing at the "Do Not Enter" door, "and apprehend the juvenile idiots. Blackmood, you stay here. This sort of action is not suitable for someone of the weaker sex." Blackmood replied with, "Yes, sir," and then thought to herself, "This is the first time Cringeworthy has referred to me as a woman, albeit in a roundabout way. Oh, how I despise him." Just then the second SUV had arrived with the 2 MPs, who were ordered to catch the teenagers if they happened to get out of their grasp while in the room. What they didn't know was that when Troy had received the text message from Blackmood saying his iPhone had been compromised and he could be followed on it, Slurpee, whose father worked here at the sewage treatment plant, came in with his father and looked for a door he could throw the iPhone into to put the army off the scent. And this is the door he chose. Cringeworthy lined up. He had by now got his revolver out of its holder and had it poised in his right hand, with his left hand on the door handle. Darling and Dumb were close behind. Cringeworthy started to whisper, 1, 2, 3, and in they crashed. Only it wasn't a room. It was a wide metal slipway going steeply downwards. It was dark as well, but they couldn't help falling onto the slipway and sliding down feet first. The smell was dire and making them all gag. They were picking up speed when, all of a sudden, they fell into this, what can only be described as thick gray sludge. It was like quicksand, and they began to slide into it slowly until they were up to their necks. It was only then that they could feel the bottom. They were retching, eyes were watering, and they began to shout for help. What they didn't know was that they had landed into a huge vat of decomposing human feces that had been extracted from numerous septic tanks in the area. Septic tanks accumulate human waste principally. They are usually found in areas where there isn't the normal sewage system of underground pipes. Every so often, a special truck comes along, sucks up all that smelly waste, and deposits it at sewage treatment sites like this one. The MPs and Blackmood at the top of the slipway tentatively opened the door, holding rags over their noses, and in the dim light could see Cringeworthy, Dumb, and Darling, up to their necks in gray, sludgy sewage. They were pulled out with ropes and stood there, in the hot sun, dripping gray sewage sludge onto the concrete floor. They said nothing, but you could tell Cringeworthy was livid that he had been duped by that imbecile of a boy. The MPs laid down some tarpaulin on the floor and seats of one SUV. Cringeworthy, Dumb, and Darling stepped in, and the SUV sped back to base. Blackmood and the MPs traveled back in the second SUV. As it happened, the route to the sewage treatment plant went past the cave, and the two SUVs were speeding on this road back to the camp, when one of the dammers had come below the clouds to check out the red bus, since it had stopped on a verge, from where then, after a short climb down, you would have come to the cave. However, the dammer came down at precisely the time the SUVs were rushing past. Cringeworthy, Dumb, and Darling had their heads out of 3 different windows of the SUV for as much fresh air as they could breathe in. The dammer looked at them, and something clicked. Their features he recognized as being those that needed to be investigated. So the dammer rushed back up to tell the other dammers that were waiting for it above the clouds. Since they were not sure where Pangy and the other humans had gone, they quickly decided they would follow the SUVs and investigate those humans since they were recognized. They turned around and rushed after the SUVs. Little did Cringeworthy or the dammers realize how close they both were to finding Troy and the rest of the gang. It was laughable. The SUVs had made it back to the camp, closely followed up in the sky by the dammers. The SUV with Cringeworthy, Dumb, and Darling in went straight to the mini sports building that contained toilets and, more importantly, showers. They arrived and tentatively walked into the building, past other soldiers who were training in the gym, who were now pulling faces and complaining about the horrible smell. They stripped off and jumped into the showers and continued to wash all the gray slime off their bodies. They had put their uniforms into yellow hazardous materials, plastic bags. After a good 10 minutes of washing, shampooing, and scrubbing, they came out and quietly started to towel dry. Blackmood had already arranged for new uniforms to be delivered, and they were already waiting for them in the changing room. It was at precisely this point that the dammers decided to give them a visit. Cringeworthy, Darling, and Dumb suddenly started feeling very cold. So much so their lips were turning blue, and their teeth were chattering. In front of them were the Dammers. Cringeworthy, Dumb, and Darling were frightened. No doubt about it, and huddled together. The Dammers came closer and started to extract their souls to check if they knew the location of the Crodoyo crystals, and particularly the star maps to Pange's world. They didn't have either, of course, but didn't know not to resist. And a Dammer likes nothing more than someone who resists. So they increased the pressure, just for the fun of it. But no, they didn't have the information. So the head Dammer called them off, and they shot out through the roof and into the sky. Never before had a Dammer carried out a partial soul extract on a human. All species react in different ways to this particularly unpleasant probe. So what Cringeworthy, Dumb, and Darling were left with was very unusual. The process had completely changed their sexual orientation. They all thought they were now women. Oh, they knew they were in the army, why they were here, and their ranks, and their personalities were the same, but in their psyche, they were women. No doubt about it. The first indication of this was when they unpacked their uniforms. They were complaining that they wanted skirts, tights, and bras. Cringeworthy was very upset because he said he couldn't find his makeup kit. Darling was looking in the mirror, pushing his hair around and wanting to visit a hairdresser. Dumb was holding his jacket up to his face and turned to Darling and said, "Darling, what color of eye, shadow, and eyeliner would work well with this color of fabric? And what about lipstick? And OMG, my nails! They are dreadful." He looked like he was about to burst into tears. He continued, "Well, we always have Blackmood. I am sure she will lend us some lippy until I can get mine." For now, they knew they had no choice but to dress in the very male uniforms until they could feminize them in some way. They minced out of the shower block, through the gym, where very muscle-bound soldiers were training. They couldn't stop themselves winking at the soldiers as they pranced out. You can't imagine the looks on the soldiers' faces. They were completely perplexed. They went outside and Blackmood was waiting for them. She remarked to Cringeworthy, "Oh, you must feel so much better now, sir." Cringeworthy came back with, "Oh, I most certainly do, Darling." Now, this was very confusing, because Darling smiled at Cringeworthy, thinking he was talking to him, but Blackmood was sure he was addressing her. "Oh, dear Blackmood," continued Cringeworthy, "you look very confused. Whatever is the matter, dear?" "Well, before that, we need some things urgently, and I would like you to sort that out ASAP." "Certainly, sir," replied Blackmood, and got her small pad and pen out ready. "Right," blurted out Cringeworthy. "I can only speak for myself. The ladies here," and pointed at Darling and Dumb, "will have their own specific requests. I would like a decent bra, skirt, tights, and some basic makeup. Okay, Darling?" Again, Darling looked at Cringeworthy and fluttered his eyelids at him. Blackmood didn't write a thing down. She just stood there, completely confused. Whatever had happened to them? She studied all three of them and hadn't a clue as to what was happening. Cringeworthy looked at Blackmood and said, "Did you get all that down, sweetie?" Blackmood replied with, yes. Yes, I think so, sir. If you want to wear a skirt, would you like more appropriate shoes to wear with your uniform? I don't think the large, hobnailed military men's boots would go well with tights and a skirt. Cringeworthy started doing dainty claps. Oh, well done, Blackmood, for spotting that. He turned to Dumb and Darling. Isn't she a clever girl, ladies? Darling and Dumb nodded vigorously. They then lined up to put their requests for bras, makeup, and lipstick colors to Blackmood. Blackmood was convinced she was dreaming. She was totally confused, of course. And Cringeworthy was still her superior officer. So there was nothing for it but to go along with it for now. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for Chapter 13. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.